if we don't take the time to ask those questions and identify those activities, then we're back on autopilot. And that shit just keeps building and our minds keep getting stuffed until there's, too much pressure.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's always an honor and a privilege to have someone with a similar name to me on the podcast, and also someone who had a similar background. We actually worked at the same company when we were both pharmaceutical reps and have gone through personal transformation. So, Marc Champagne, pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine, Mark. It's full circle in terms of our life paths in a way. So it's exciting. I'm pumped to chat.
I find that so crazy about it, which is when you're a rep or you're in any job, let's be honest, and you have this sort of nudge, this calling, this feeling. But, they have that saying that about golden handcuffs, when you're in a job that has like a pension, all the buzzy HR finance terms, that you have this calling, and it feels, when I was leaving that work, and I'm curious to hear your experience, people would be like, why would you let that go? And you can't see where you're going to be. You just have a feeling. And I'm curious what your experience of that feeling was. How did it show up?
Yeah, I mean, interesting you bring that up in that way, because I had two experiences when I made the decision to leave and jump in the entrepreneurial world and start an app. On my close network and family side of things, especially my parents, they were like, what the hell are you doing? Like, you've got, all these investments and the security and all of that stuff, which I totally get it. I mean, they're from that world. But what was super interesting on the other side, sharing it with colleagues that say, hey, I've got this idea. I would regret not trying it. If it doesn't work, I'll come back, blah, blah, blah. The sentiment, and I didn't expect this, was, wow, you're so brave. Like, I have an idea too, but I couldn't, that just was over. The feeling just kept coming up over and over again. And I'd never, from people that I was really close with, that, wow, I didn't know that, you were thinking that as well. I mean, what, just go for it then. But you're like, no, I can't. There's no way I could do that. Right. So, yeah, so I felt both of those experiences.
It's amazing how many people have a subtle, or maybe not so subtle, calling that gets pushed into the background or underneath, and they're rationalizing why they shouldn't leave, or why they can't leave, or why that or why pursuing that passion is illogical. I did that for years. I did that. I rationalized my way out of it till it was so loud and the opportunity was so possible that I couldn't say no anymore. It was almost like I knew that I would get sick if I continued to stay in the old space. Was that true for you too, or?
My situation was more because I wasn't in a place, I got to this place after, but I wasn't in a place where I didn't like my job. I was, it was going really well. And there was just this underlying desire to try out this, this journaling app, because I had the practice. From the beginning, I started sales. I had started that practice, and I saw how powerful, reflection was. And I guess the part that gave enough comfort or stability was I had fired off an email to my brother-in-law, who has been a lifelong entrepreneur. And I expressed that here's what's going on. Headspace and Calm, really just they're killing it in the mainstream, meditation market. There's nothing that exists for guided journaling at this point. And I gave all the reasons. I said, is this something you'd be interested in exploring together? Because we got along really well. He had a designer on his team. He was doing, websites and also IT, phone systems and internet, nothing to do with app development, which is, our naive brains thinking, oh yeah, we can develop an app, no problem. Right. But it was enough that I remember we were at a conference together. I was there for the pharma company. He was just coming. I said, when you swing by? And we started chatting, and he's like, why don't you just join my company as a partner? And you can help me on the marketing side because I need help with that. But then 80% of your time is to build out this brand new mental fitness wellness business. So with that, then all of a sudden, it wasn't just leaving behind this financial security. There was a bit of a replacement, and it seemed like it was going to be even better. I mean, it didn't play out like that, but that was enough to give, okay, I'm going to try this. And thankfully, like you hear these stories all the time, like had you known that certain things would play out, like I would have never left. Right. So it's in a way, it was a great experience to be almost naive to what it takes to develop an app, what it takes to run one of these businesses kind of that's brand new in the space. I'm here because of it. Like there's a whole level of detail obviously where it blew up, and ironically what I shared with seeing colleagues on the other side saying, "Oh, you're so brave for going, jumping down this world." That was the thing that just messed me up the most when the whole thing blew up, because I'm like, now I got to go back to those people and be like, I guess you were right. Like you made the right decision, right? Like that was the looping narrative I had when that app financially didn't work.
It's such an interesting perspective too, because I get that. I remember when I was leaving, my dad said to me, "Why don't you just take a leave of absence?" And I was like, "Dad, that's like saying I don't trust."
Yeah,
Like that was too much of I still got one foot in the nest, so to
yeah,
speak, and interesting that we have this narrative. And for context for you listening, like there's no better person to be interviewing right now about mental fitness and personal inquiry than Marc, because your work was
yeah,
teaching that, and that was also your process. And so to go through these really challenging life circumstances, and to come back to your idea about like leaving, going out on this adventure, doing the thing, creating it not working out how you had anticipated, and yet, it works out in some respect. But when you're
yeah,
in it, it's like when you're in the transformation, you're not like, this is juicy transformation. You're like,
yeah,
this shit's hard. But it's ironic that it's not even ironic. It's painful that our conceptual narrative that we've been taught is that to return to the tribe or to return to the people and come back with this story of quote unquote failure,
hmm,
as opposed to wisdom and what you've learned. It just is so indicative to me of just the way that we relate to,
yeah,
like, to come back with triumph is totally different. If you came back a .com billionaire, people would be like, you succeeded. But you came back not that, but with like incredible experience
yeah,
that
sure.
everyone should be like, tell me more about journaling. Tell me more about failure.
But I think there's a timing thing there, because that ended up, and I mean that's kind of where I'm at now, where like my mess is turned into the story and the teachable moments. But right in the moment, like
Yeah.
when I was sitting in Toronto, Canada, looking at the Apple dashboard, and I'm looking at these stats that we had reached 86.9 million people, and my
That's
next step
nuts.
is to hit delete from App Store. Like, what
Oh
the fuck?
God. Like of all the when they say leave on a high, like, but when the leaving isn't, it's not like Jordan coming back from retirement,
Yeah, yeah.
the third time maybe. But what was that like, that moment of conceptually, like everything you'd created, every heart you'd touched,
Yeah.
being removed almost from the cloud even? Historically, throughout the day, you'd see me drinking a flavored sparkling water, and if I went to a social event, whether people are drinking or not, I'd go to the standard sober person's drink, flavored or regular sparkling water. And I thought to myself, like, can I find a drink that not only tastes good, but perhaps improves my mood, increases my attentiveness, my awareness? And I'm in love with this product from Cured Nutrition called Euphoria. It's a natural caffeine replacement. It's great for energizing your mind, your mood, your body. And in it are the highest quality adaptogens and nootropics. So some of the ingredients, just to give you a heads up, are lion's mane, which is a medicinal mushroom. There's also premium CBD in it. And that way you get that balanced energy. You don't get that tired and wired feeling. There's L-theanine, which is an amino acid that gives you energy and relaxation. There's 5-HTP to support your serotonin levels. And there's also vitamins A, B, and C. This drink tastes freaking amazing. There's a spicy mango flavor. That's actually my favorite. There's also a crisp apple. That's delicious too, but I invite you to check it out if you're looking for something to get you through the parties, also the afternoons instead of your coffee, and it'll help improve your focus, your productivity, your mood, your cognitive performance, then definitely try this drink out. Go to Cured Nutrition, which is CURED nutrition.com/create the love, and Cured is extending an offer to you, my listeners, of 20% off. So just use the code create the love at checkout. So once again, that's curednutrition.com/create the love, and the coupon code create the love at checkout will save you 20% on any and all of Cured Nutrition's products. So right before I sat down to get some work done this afternoon, I experienced that classic afternoon crash. My energy was dropping, and I could feel that my brain was sort of like, are we going to do this? And I don't drink caffeine very often anymore. I don't want to be dependent on it. I might have a coffee once a week. And the reason is I don't want to have to be like, oh, I need a coffee to get through this afternoon. I felt like that was just another form of addiction. And I like my body and my mind to be free from the necessity of things in order to show up and perform. And so one thing that I've done in order to replace coffee and still get energy and also nutrition is I've been taking Organifi red juice. It's got 13 superfoods. It's fully organic. It's got no caffeine, just 2 grams of sugar that come from freeze-dried berries. Not only does it provide me with energy, but it's actually super delicious and super easy to make. In 30 seconds, you just open it up, mix it with some water, and drink it down. And as I said, it tastes so great. So if you want to save 20% off red juice, this sounds like it'd be a good fit for you if you're trying to kick coffee or whatever. Check it out. Go to Organifi.com/create the love, and that's Organifi.com/create the love. Go check it out. You save 20% on all the good stuff.
I'll never forget that moment because we had a team maybe about 6 internal, maybe about 12, like with extended team and so forth. But those 6 people that were internal were all scattered around the world. I was the only one in this co-working space. And I just remember feeling so alone and reflecting on like, holy shit, in one tap of like my mouse pad, I'm deleting 3.5 years worth of work and just like constant belief of we're going to do this, we're going to impact a million minds, like we're making a difference in this world. And now I'm deleting it. I'm deleting my identity essentially from the last 3
Wow.
years. And I also don't want to go back to where I came from, which was the backup plan. Because now, having gone through the experience, I'm like, damn straight, like this is the work. Mental fitness is the work that I need to be in. And I'm deleting the vehicle that's keeping me in this. And I have, for the first time in my life, I have no plan forward. I mean, you came from a similar, like you knew exactly what we were doing. Like every year, this was the plan. If you want to go here, you do this, do that. And this is the first time, no idea what's going on. I'd moved to Toronto. We're in a place that, we're renting. We had sold everything out of Montreal to do this. Can't afford where we're living. Where it's always supposed to be temporary. And it's just like, well, now what? Right? So I could feel
Fuck.
myself. It's the first time I've ever felt, and I was working at the end, when I was in pharma, I was working on mental health products. So I had, general understanding of some signs and symptoms, right? I could see myself going into a depression.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until, thankfully, and this is, I think you alluded to this, but like working in this space, thankfully I had hundreds of interviews to recall and think, well, wait a second. I've interviewed like Michelin star chefs to Olympians and billionaires. They're asking a very different set of questions than the set that I'm asking right now. And for
Yeah.
me was, how could we fail at such a colossal level, right? What my ex-colleagues think, our advisors, my family, they were asking more progressive questions to pull
Like
yourself out
what?
of these.
Yeah.
Well, just like the question I ended up landing on eventually was, well, what do I want for my life?
Hmm.
Right? And then that
That's
led
such
to
a
the
big
next one.
question.
It's huge. And like, I think like if I were to ask that question now, and sometimes I do think about that, it's a check-in though. Like at that moment
Oh,
though,
because like it's been so programmed into your vernacular, your rituals, your habits
yeah,
that,
it's
but that
exactly.
moment, it took that moment to to reach for these tools that you'd cultivated and learned about. But now you're like this, because I always think those are the moments, like the moments when life is the hardest. That's usually when we throw all our anchors, all our strategies, our exercise routines. They go out the window and we reach for maybe not the right word, but they're almost like more dark coping mechanisms.
Well, the comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I love kettle cooked salt and vinegar chips. They're great to
Yeah.
go through sad,
For
grieving
sure.
moments, but they're not getting me out. You
No.
know, you started with the question, what do I want from my life? And for the you listening, like just to pause with that, because that's such a good check-in. I'm considering that even right now too, is like, what do I want with my life? What values? How do I want to be remembered? Where did that take you? And then what next?
Well, so it's interesting you mentioned the habits we usually let slip. Thankfully, again, like that's where I was working in the space and knew I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I know that I'm not dropping my gym membership and I'm starting every morning. At the time, I was at the YMCA and they had like a steam room in there and whatnot. And that time from like end of workout to before going into that co-working space of just meditating and being, present between that and those questions, like that's what saved me, or I would have been in a deep depression. Because then, like that's the big question. But after that, it's like, okay, well, if this is what I want, like this is how I want to show up. Well, then how will the days look and feel, right? Who do I need to
Mm,
speak with to help support that journey? And then like what's one step to take today that I can just giving these micro moments of motivation and to bring back that hope because I had lost it all. Right? There was nothing there.
yeah.
It's like I just deleted everything. Everything's gone. So now what? And I'm not going to say like that. Those are really hard times, but just dialing into gratitude, present moment. I remember even when I deleted the app, I was thinking, I'm like, I'm in this co-working space that's safe, that, there's really smart, intelligent people around here that I'm sure I can network with and, find some sort of freelance work until I can figure out exactly what I'm going to do next. And I just deleted this app on a laptop that most people in the world actually don't even have. So just like
Mm,
perspective check, right?
yeah, to
Just to
contextualize
cut
that.
it. Because if you don't do that, at least in my case, if I didn't do that, my mind just starts to loop. Like, I'm not going to be able to afford rent. My 2-year-old's going to, like, what's my 2-year-old going to think of his dad? Like, all of these things, right? It's so fast how that happens. And thankfully, though, when it comes to any type of mental fitness, which to me is just training your mind to perform for you instead of against you, gives you enough self-awareness that, oh, okay, I'm going into that loop. I'm going to go for a walk and I'm going to cut it,
Mm,
right? Or I'm going to just close my eyes and think of someone that I'm really grateful that's in my life. I'm going to send them a quick message and just, hey, just thinking about you. Hope you're awesome. You made their day, they make your day. And it's just enough to cut the loops. I still use this stuff, right? Like there's no shortage of craziness going on in the world right now that, I mean, it's easy to get wrapped up into any type of narratives that aren't serving the person you're striving to become, right? And these practices at least give us the luxury of the pause.
yeah, in your podcast where you interview sort of world-renowned experts in who have achieved things in all different areas,
Yeah.
and you explore what is their sort of mental fitness routines. How do they retain or continue to do what you said, which is in that moment of pause when there's what someone else might consider failure. And I think that quote, rejection is redirection, sort of fits very well in that question of, okay, this thing ended, much like we experience relationally, but this is yours is your relationship with your purpose, your relationship,
Yeah.
the thing you're doing every day, the way that you're wanting to reach people. And the people that you interview, I'm curious, what is in your experience sort of the top 3 habits or mental fitness routines, or the ones that have touched you the most or changed you the most?
It's just being conscious of the fact that when we focus on creating space in our minds or still our minds, that's when insight comes up. And then that's when you start to see the signs moving forward. So, and this is how the app came up. The app came up because I was getting up earlier in the morning, being in sales, thinking, as you know, like everyone's trained in the exact same way. I'm like, how can I possibly stand out? I mean, I need to do something differently. I started getting up earlier in the morning and studying people. At the time, reading blogs and so forth. And when pods came on the market, started listening to those interviews. And it wasn't like meditation. I think the stat is like 80, you can predict that about 80% of those people are meditating. In this case, 100% of them had a reflective practice. We're all asking questions, just though,
100% of them
for sure, right?
that is so important, because
Yeah,
whenever I've had a reflective practice, which I do, but when I didn't, to compare to when I do, I mean, they're two different people. One's sort of
yeah,
reacting to the world, and the other one is observing and planning in some way.
for sure, for sure. So essentially, what I was doing was collecting their questions, and that's what I still do to this day on Behind the Human. Because I mean, that's why the line on the back of my book is
Oh,
this
that's
line,
such a good line.
right? It's we're all one question away from a completely different life or outcome.
That we're all one question away from a completely different life.
Well, that's what I felt, right? When I deleted the app. That one question for me stopped my downward track and put me on this journey, which feels really great. But that's like the grandiose situation. We can leverage that philosophy in the day to day as well when you deploy some sort of gratitude, right? If you're not feeling great, and I encourage people to do this right now. If you're feeling a bit off right now, just close your eyes again and bring up a moment that you conquered in your life that you can celebrate, and tap into those feelings. Like, where are you feeling that in your body? You can't be thinking about the other narrative that's sending you down another track when you're thinking of those moments, right? I think it's Tony Robbins that says this, but you can't be grateful and fearful at the same time. It's really hard to be in both of those states of mind. So, when you're in those moments, you can deploy these questions like, what can I celebrate about my life? Who can I celebrate? In that moment, you're one question away from a completely different mindset. And we have to keep doing that though, because I mean, when you're on autopilot, which many people are, and myself, I fall into that every now and then as well. And society is set up in that way. It's easy to just jump into, news headlines or whatever's going on. And even in the workplace, like, oh yeah, we're doing this project. This is what we need to do. Like, people have just stopped thinking. So these questions allow us to just pause for a second, create some mental space, ask some good questions, and think.
To actually take a little moment. That pause, is it a Viktor Frankl quote that is between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space, I think it's something like you get to choose, and
Yeah,
essentially that space changes your life.
that's the superpower. And the more you have, obviously journaling is a big one for me, but breath work, meditation, just walks in silence, like all those things are doing is just increasing that self-awareness to give you more of that micro pause that you can, yeah, you zoom up to 40,000 feet. And instead of reacting, you can now respond in a more intentional way. But before you get into these intentional responses or take the action that's more intentional, first we have to get clear, right? So, like, that's why that question for me, what do I want for my life, was so important, because we can easily get onto, this is James Clear, like, am I climbing the right mountain? Right? Like, let's identify the mountain and then get into the process of, all right, do my habits, systems, the people around me, do they support that person that I'm striving to become? If they're not, they're just driving you down the mountain, or you're going to blow off the side, right? But this is a thought process. Like, this is why I'm so passionate about this stuff. This is not earth shattering. I'm not inventing journaling. I'm not inventing questions. They've been around since the beginning of time. But all we need to do is just slow it down a little bit so we can let our awesome mind, work its magic instead of being on autopilot.
Well, and the mind gets so captured by social media and everything. It's how
Yeah.
much I was thinking the other day that one of the most powerful, I forget who I was listening to, but they were saying that one of the most powerful birthplaces of creativity and insight, as you're mentioning too, is boredom. Is actually boredom, but we don't even know what that is generally anymore.
Because it feels terrifying,
Right.
right? Stare out the window, be like, I don't think so.
Yeah, and all of a sudden your soul's like, hey, you should probably have that conversation. And you're like, where's my Instagram feed? Can I watch a TikTok dance? Because
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with this shit. I saw a meme the other day that had like kids sitting on wagons and sitting on the street. and it said we didn't realize how good we had it when we were kids. And, smartphones and phones and computers were not really around they were definitely not around in my childhood.
Yeah.
Computers came around in, I think, 86 when I was like 8. So I do remember having one, but it wasn't capturing enough that I would, it was like MS-DOS. You had to like
Yeah.
know commands and,
Yeah. We're from the same era.
right. Like nothing like what it does to a kid's brain today. It's like the juiciest, coolest thing
Yeah.
no kid's brain stands much like an adult, actually. Say kids, adults. Human brains don't stand a chance against the behavioral psychologists that are teamed to get
Hmm.
you to be on these devices. And it's such an act of sovereignty that I struggle with too, to reclaim one's own attention in order to ask these questions. And, journaling, the audience, like you listening, I am sure you've heard episodes on breath work and meditation and personal inquiry, but never have I interviewed someone about the act of journaling. Where does one even start with that? And I guess you got to say, I'm going to go spend some time I'm going to go be bored and ask myself some questions and birth some answers.
Well, I think the greatest starting point would be to come in blowing out your definition of journaling, because most of us, and myself included when I first got into it, think of journaling as pen to paper, like light a candle, set the
I think of it
ambiance,
like
and
a
just
diary too. Yeah.
exactly. I used to get that all the time. I had to adjust the language just to avoid this, but I used to get it all the time where people are like, "Oh, you're talking about the 12-year-old girl writing in her diary about the boy at school." I said, "There's nothing
so,
wrong with
so
that."
true.
But not necessarily. I'm talking about these big questions that literally have the power to change our lives. So I would suggest the definition I give to journaling is that, which is the practice behind journaling, and that's just reflection. So reflection, we all do. It's just thought, right? And you can do that pen to paper. You can use an app if you have a really good relationship with your technology, which falls into your work, right? Because you don't want to load up your app and all of a sudden you're hit with Slack notifications, kind of defeats the purpose. But there are so many different things you do. Audio notes, you can take a walk and just think about a question that you want to answer, or you go to sleep, for example. This is one I use all the time. Like, what do I want to say? What feels right? Write that question down, go to sleep. First thing you do when you wake up is answer the question. And all of a sudden you have this like flurry of answers after your
That's
mind
beautiful.
has reflected on it. Yeah, I borrowed that. I mean, Cal Fussman, a legendary Esquire journalist and writer, is the one that shared that one with me. And he said, Mark, I never start writing a piece with an empty mind. If I don't have it, I'm going to write down what do I want to say, go to sleep, and then I'll start in the morning, for example. And I'm like, wow, you can use that in so many different places. So yeah, so I would start with just being open and with a blank canvas to all we're going to do is reflect, and then just start small, like anything. Like we get so wrapped up in these big complexities of, it's just like if you want to just start to exercise, like don't aim for the marathon in 3 weeks, like just start moving the body a little bit, right? And slowly getting there. So maybe all you're doing to get started, and this is journaling, this is reflection, when your coffee's brewing in the morning or your tea's steeping or your first glass of water, how do I want to show up today? One word. Just set the intention for the day. Or you can start and you can marry this together. How do I feel today? One word. I feel anxious. Where do you feel that? I feel it in my chest. Because like here's the thing, whether you stop and do this or not, that stuff's coming in with you for the day, right? And that's going to show up in conversation, in your work, your mind. So just literally 5 minutes of two questions, two-word answers. You've already done most or more than most of the population, and you're starting the day on your own terms. And then you just
Hmm.
start building it out. And the next thing you know, you get into questions like what you and I were chatting about our last conversation. But like, what am I pretending not to know? It's a little bit of a
That's a
deeper
powerful one.
question.
Yeah, let's pause on that one. What am
Yeah.
I pretending not to know? I feel like the trickster, the self-saboteur, the subcontracting of authority to other people. I feel like when you see that habit in people where they constantly ask for advice from other people and they just don't trust themselves. They've been told not to trust themselves. They've been
Yeah.
socialized not to trust themselves. Like that, what am I pretending not to know?
Because we know. That's the thing. We know it's there. It's in the back corner of the mind, and that's probably where we need to go. And we don't hear it often because there's so much moving around us. There's too many distractions and too much noise, too many decisions, emails, things we need to do. But that's what happens when you take even 10 minutes just to quiet the mind a bit. All of a sudden, you're like, oh, where's that been? Right. And that, going full circle to your question about like what I've noticed with interviewing all these different people, they do that. They take the time to just slow it down and think, right? And then all of a sudden, it's like, wow, that was a great decision. Well, we all have the great decisions. They're all there. We just need to organize our mind just like a neatly organized library. Right now, our minds are like we went in there and fucking tipped all over the bookshelves. It's all there, but you're like rummaging through trying to like, oh, there he is type thing, right? So organize that stuff. And it takes time, no self-judgment, just be kind to ourselves. Slowly, though, we'll become more self-aware, be able to take different courses of action. And then this is the third part of my book, and there's just an expansion of possibility because you can see.
Uh, why do you think we're so afraid of maybe even the expansion of possibility? But also, why are we afraid of the slowness that is required to get to these spaces?
Well, because it goes against the norm. Everything in society is fast. Everything. And everything I'd add on like fast and very much like coming out of the industrial revolution of like these are the steps. Like you do these things and like you'll get to a desired result or whatever. But things have changed. Like we're no longer in that era. And we're also in an era where there's just so much, so much content, so much being thrown in our minds that like we haven't evolved to handle that. Like it's like we
No, we
were just
haven't.
thrown in. I think of like to add some humor to it, to lighten it a bit. I think of a Sebastian Maniscalco skit. Are you familiar
Oh,
with him as
he's
a comedian?
hilarious. Yeah,
He
he's
just
so
taught
fun.
there's one skit about where he's talking about the grocery store and the self-checkout and how it's, he's like, I want to be the best at everything. So I went in the middle of the night and I trained myself on this because everyone else is just thrown in, right? And it's like, figure it out. I feel like we're just like thrown in the social media world or thrown in this content world and just like figure this out without the manual. Like there's no time to just slow down and it feels weird to slow it down, right?
Yeah, it does. It does. It feels so it's it's almost like when you slow down, you actually feel the momentum of everyone else fly by you. And then there's
Yeah.
like a fear of not being part of that momentum, not realizing that in the very act of slowing down, you're observing it. Like you're observing the momentum, you're observing your feeling of wanting to be part of it. You're observing, gosh, just like how we're such an achievement
Yeah.
based, outcome based. I mean, we do that from sex to our work. Like it's
Yeah.
outcome, generally outcome focused. And just in doing that, I think of when you're really present to each moment, which journaling requires, which asking these questions requires, which failure demands, because
Yeah.
it demands that you also explore that it's not failure. But like all of it ejects you from the cultural pace and really starts to get you back into alignment with their circadian rhythm of the planet, the way it's moving
Hmm.
much slower. And it's saying, just stop, just enjoy the butterfly, enjoy,
Yeah.
you know,
The thing is, it feels counterproductive, but
it
I
does.
just
Yeah.
I
But it's not.
promise and exactly. I promise and guarantee everyone listening that if you really start to do this, I mean, your ideas will go to the next level. The right projects will show up, and just there's less noise. And next thing you know, I'm like, holy smokes! Like I am on the right path, and the right people are showing up. I'm doing the right work because you've slowed it down. But the key is we need the check-ins, right? Like take the 10 or 15 minutes on a Friday afternoon and just take a look like is my calendar like this week did I feel overbooked? When you feel this, like your shoulders get tight, your neck is sore, like you're feeling usually physically you start to feel off. I mean, that's for the most part mental tension that's just compacting. or what someone I've interviewed in the past, Chip Conley, calls psychic toll, right?
Mm,
So if we can acknowledge that's happening,
the
and
psychic toll.
psychic toll, right? It's there. And Chip, I mean, he's on the cover of the book for a reason. I've learned so much from him. And he just does these simple check-ins. How am I feeling? Right? Because then you start to see, oh, okay, there's something here. Well, why do I feel like this? Then you start to unpack it. And next thing you know, when you're taking a look at the week that just passed, you can ask a few, these are my staple questions. What did I learn this week? What would I have changed this week? And always end on gratitude. What can I celebrate about this week? And now you've just given yourself the opportunity to make some changes next week so that maybe it's not such a full week or whatever, or you're directing energy on the right projects. And slowly but surely, you start releasing that psychic toll and you start becoming way more aligned with the right path, and you're making better decisions and you feel a hell of a lot better. Like let's not forget about
Definitely.
that.
Yeah.
Right.
Completely change how you feel. And it occurs to me that you would be building just through the practice, just through the starting, just through the continuing.
Oh yeah.
You'd be building this like really deep, intimate relationship with yourself, which I'll speak from my own experience that can be terrifying because there's so many things ourselves have been trying to say to us that we don't want to hear. Like you said, the bookshelf is pushed over
Mhm.
because we don't want all the wisdom, because the wisdom would say, leave this, start this, say this, end
Yeah.
this, demand this, boundary this, love this, or
Yeah.
heal this. All these messages are constantly being pushed into they're always in our awareness, and
Yeah.
they get pushed down or pushed out or silenced through addictions, through busyness. I mean, psychic toll. I mean, I feel the truth of that term, of just, if you were to consider your week and to think what events in my week had a positive versus negative psychic toll. I mean, I'm sure our partners and our toddlers would be included in those sometimes. But
Yeah.
even acknowledging that is to just be in relationship with our shadow, to be in relationship with truth. It's not like it's bad that you had a bad week in connecting with your partner,
No.
you know?
No, but even like some other language around that, like the other question you could ask is, what mental suffering did I put myself through this week? Right?
Oh, I think we'd be afraid of that answer, because you realize that you're your own executioner, in a way.
Yeah, but here's the thing though, like I get it. And to move from that, I think we just need to take small steps so it's not so
Hmm.
terrifying. Like I'm not saying,
Yeah.
hey, just go and quit your job immediately without thinking about it. But if we don't spend some time in those clarity seeking questions and getting clear, I mean, we're just delaying it because what's going to happen? The worst case scenario that I can see play out, there's two cases. One, and you hear this all the time, you're going to hit a wall and life explodes, work explodes, you get chronic disease, illness, something happens that forces you into some pretty deep reflective questions, right? That's
Yes.
one stage. The other stage, and this is even worse in my opinion, you get to your deathbed and you have 1,000 regrets. And there's some science there, or I'll have to look, there's a profile on Ben Nimton in the book, and I think Stanford did a study on this, but it was alarmingly high, like over 50% of people that land on their deathbed have some sort of regrets that, in their life. And that's sad, right? Like,
Isn't it?
so sad. So sad. It doesn't have to be like that.
It doesn't. It makes me think of how powerful the process of something like AA is, because
Yeah.
it's successful because it has you, which I think most personal growth programs have this built into them. That's what makes them helpful, is to be able to ask questions like you're inviting, which is, what do I currently regret? And how do I repair it? How do I
Mhm.
heal from it? How do I grow from it? Like in AA, you got to go clear with the people you've impacted. You've got to
Yeah.
own it. I mean, it's humility on steroids. But when you heal those things, all of a sudden you don't have the call for alcohol or addictions, or less of,
Mhm.
because you begin to alchemize your shame in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I like that language.
Man, that is the ultimate personal work, to sit in the space, to get the answers. In your book, and for you listening, it's called personal Socrates or personal Socrates, depending on where you're from in the world. I had to ask Mark ahead of time, like, how do I pronounce which one's right? And they're both right, I'm happy to say. In
Yes.
your book, can you give people an idea of the sort of layout and
Mhm.
how it might walk people through this process?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I didn't come to this reflection as I was writing it, but now talking about it and using it myself, like, I actually reread profiles myself, so I do practice what I preach.
You do, because when we were talking separately previously, you're like, go to this section. This is one of my favorite ones that I do a lot.
Yeah. Well, because, what's in there are people and prompts that were incredibly helpful to me, but also the representation of the book is very similar to what people were experiencing with the app. I mean, the app succeeded in many different ways. We screwed up the financials and like the flow of the app, but the content and the fact that we were leading people through topics with questions worked really well. That's what the book is. So I wrote it in or designed it in a way that they're 3 to 4 page profiles, recorded the audiobook myself. So I know that's anywhere from 10 to 12 minutes. So it's accessible for people if you don't have a mental fitness practice. There we are. There it is.
Just for
Um,
everyone watching the video, here's what it looks like.
yes.
It's
So
beautiful.
it's accessible, right? That if you don't have a practice, one profile can be the practice, and if you already have something in play, then the questions you can upgrade them. For example, what I did is I took some of the most popular interviews and conversations I've had on the show. And I went back to those interviews and they're not writing the content of the interview in the profile. I'm using the content of the interview to inspire prompts and mental fitness to support the theme, for example. So half of the profiles are set up in that way, lead you through bigger questions and some small. And then the other half of the profiles are all people that you would recognize their name, like Picasso, Jane Austen, Maya Angelou. And that was a different flow in the sense that I'm not writing a biography. And I had to, again, this is where the editors turned into therapists for me, because how can I do Maya Angelou justice on a 4 page
Oh,
mental
right.
fitness profile, right? I had to come to the realization that that's not what I'm doing here. You can get that work in other places. My objective is to find the questions inspired by her work, her life, and her message that will then help us through her story to get to where we're at. For example, her opening prompt is, how do I rise up? And if you go through the whole profile, the through line is, to rise up for others, you have to first rise up for yourself. And in between all of that are the questions and mental fitness to help go down that path. So it's a book that I really hope that people can just pick up at any point and just, jam on a prompt or person. I actually encourage people to just kind of follow your intuition. That's probably where, if you land on a Picasso prompt or Kobe Bryant or Stephen Hawking, like those are the areas that you probably need the most guidance, 'cause for whatever reason you were called to stop there. So, yeah, it's a bit of a choose your own adventure. Other than reading the introduction kind of from start to finish, everything else, open it as needed. And I've found it's been so fun to experience or to have it out in the world, because there's all these other use cases that are coming up. And if I think of your audience and your work, I see a lot of couples that are reading a profile together and then coming together and using, that 10 or 15 minutes to like, well, what did you answer for those prompts? And there's this beautiful dialogue that then happens that, you know, even for myself, wasn't happening in the relationship. And these are questions that we probably wouldn't just, you know, bring up on Sunday dinner type thing. They're a little bit
We
different.
do
So
now. We
we
do
do
now.
now. So anyway, yeah. So all to say, I like just have fun with it. Enjoy the process, enjoy the reflection, and see where it goes.
Well, I love that. One of my favorite things to do with books that are laid out like yours and yours is to just open it randomly on
Mm.
and just
Yeah.
allow the universe to decide what is the reflection. Like, it's funny because as you were talking, I opened it to be like, oh, where's a good relationship one? And I get Melissa Ambrosini's What Expectations Am I Holding in My Relationships? So beautiful Like you think about how in the context of mental fitness, because I think that term is probably difficult for people to understand. Like, what does it mean to be mentally fit?
Yeah.
And the invitation, of course, is into self-inquiry and maybe having a process, especially because it's not taught to us in school. That's a whole other, we could rant
Mhm.
about that all day for sure on a whole
Yeah.
podcast episode. That self-inquiry generally is not in the public Catholic, whatever school system, in
Yeah.
maybe high end private ones. I don't even know. But yeah, what does mental fitness look like? And I think it is important to have structure to it to walk you through, and then one can begin to cultivate their own questions through intuition. But yeah, please.
Well, I mean, mental fitness came out in this like that language came out of necessity because when I was speaking about the app and that business, it was really easy to get pulled into mental health. And even
Yeah.
though,
Yeah.
there's
True.
a lot of great forward advancement and opening discussions around mental health, there's still so much stigma there. And
Yeah.
usually the narrative with mental health is that even how I described my situation falling into depression, it's like you're in a hole and you're pulling yourself out in some capacity, right? And we need those tools. We need that conversation to happen. But mental fitness includes all of that. So it's the umbrella, in my opinion, to mental health, mental performance, mental optimization, resiliency. It's more of a motivating term that, you know what, I'm gonna take ownership of my mental fitness and I'm gonna tap on all of those categories and I'll do it on my own terms and I'll do things that light me up. Just like
Hmm.
physical fitness, just because you don't like spinning doesn't rule out all of exercise. So find the practices and on the mental fitness and physical side that line up, to what you enjoy doing. And that's what I love about the term or the whole concept is that there are a million different things you can do. But just start, here coming back to a question, like what are 5 activities or practices that if when you do them, put a smile on your face and make you feel great? I mean, just list those things out. And just having that list gives us confidence knowing that if shit hits the fan, okay, well, I'm just going to default to, I don't know, this gratitude practice. Or when I was in my low, those are long walks in the east part of Toronto, and just clearing my mind, for example. But if we don't
Mm.
take the time to ask those questions and identify those activities, then we're back on autopilot. And that shit just keeps building and our minds keep getting stuffed and stuffed until there's, too much pressure, right?
Yeah, we don't often think of our mind fitness, and it couldn't become more important than in times of stress, duress, change, endings, beginnings. And you realize that building the practice, you don't realize how good the tools work till you need the tools. And the best time to do that, much like couples therapy or personal coaching or whatever, we seek those things when things are bad and not realizing that we should actually seek those things when things are good, because that actually allows
Exactly.
us, right, to become better. Like to take something like your book and go through the process of saying, all right, here's these moments of self-inquiry. I'm going to prioritize these questions, these thought, these processes, so that, it's kind of like when Kai and I broke up previously. I remember being in just such a real heavy place.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking to myself as I was just laying there in bed, just thinking, like, sitting with all that grief and thinking, like, I understand suicide on such a different level now. Like, I
Yeah.
understood it because my feeling at the time was that the idea of not being here felt easier than being here in that
Hmm.
moment.
Yeah.
But I also knew that I was observing that and that it was temporary and that I'd been through heavy places and I'd gotten through them. And I also knew that my practices used to go out the window
Yeah.
in those times. And I knew how important it was to be in those practices and to be in a state of journaling in asking questions and realizing that there was something so much more being born. And I think that's true of any question. I love the analogy that you asked that question. I think you said it was from James Clear. Am I climbing the right mountain? I really consider that the earlier part of my journey, like being a rep and the way I was living, I really discovered that so many of us, because it was true for me, but then I started to just see it.
Mhm.
It goes to your quote on the back of your book, at any point we're one question away from a different life. So many of us are just one giant choice away from rejoining ourselves in some sense, or reclaiming
Yeah.
ourselves, or remembering ourselves. And I know we're often afraid of the answer we might find in journaling, but there's nothing to be afraid of, Like, can you speak more to that in that process?
Yeah, it's such a great point that you bring up because we are afraid of some of these answers, and I would encourage people, if you're firing up a practice or even you have an existing practice, even to step out of it for a second and just set some ground rules for yourself, right? Like, for me, I'm the only one that reads my journal unless I decide to share that, number 1, right? I'm also not writing a Fast Company article. So just, like, write for yourself and let that go wherever you need to go, or reflect, or if you're not writing, you're just thinking. Like, set some rules up that you can lighten the situation. Then you shift it into this potentially daunting practice, which I do find the prompts help because it is, even for myself, like
Definitely.
a blank piece of paper. I mean, there's great stuff from Julia Cameron and Morning Pages and so forth, and a lot of people really resonate with that. But for people starting off, a blank piece of paper is a scary place to be. Whereas the prompts at least give us an invitation to start, or direct some of that thought process, whether that's unpacking emotionally charged situations, or here's the flip side of journaling that a lot of people don't talk about. It doesn't always have to be this scary place. It can also be a tool to put your mind in this creative thinking and this realm of possibility. Here are 2 prompts that I use often before going to sleep. What if everything went right? You can insert a situation or in general, whatever, but just write out whatever you're working on, like everything going right. Like, how would that feel? What would that show up as? And it's not to say that everything will go right, but you're automatically putting your mind in a state of possibility versus in the default mode that I would say is more of a survival mode of everything going wrong, which makes us feel
Mm.
shitty, right?
Yeah, you asked me that recently, and it was a beautiful exploration of possibility when so much of what we do is ruminate and catastrophize. So it was a beautiful reframe.
Yeah. And the other one that is closely linked is just imagine if, right?
Yeah, that was the other one you gave me, which was so powerful. Yeah.
Well, it's just that these are the ones I use the most as well, and I'll never forget because there's a profile in the book on Naveen Jain, who's a billionaire entrepreneur and uses these words and this language to create these billion-dollar businesses. And he's creating these businesses to affect billions of people, essentially. And his thought process, or the way he speaks, is imagine if. Because, like, when you're tackling these problems that seem just not achievable, or that people have not gone forth to try to tackle, you have to go into this mode of possibility. And what he shared with me is when you start doing that, and then you have the conviction and the belief behind, hey, this is possible, the brightest minds in the world want to be on your team and start working on it. Right. So, I mean, there's just
Hmm.
so many examples like that. Those are big. You don't have to be creating, in Naveen's case, like companies that are going to the moon, and healthcare companies that are trying to eliminate chronic disease by your gut health and so forth with Biome, for example. You can use this in your regular day life just to shift your perspective, because the default is the opposite, unfortunately, because we're still our biology is still linked to survival mode. I mean, there's no way around that. I just, like, that's where we have not, our minds are way farther than our actual biology. So we have to short circuit that.
We do.
And you're right, and you layer on all the societal pressures and again, social media and content, it's just fueling that fear state. That doesn't help anyone. Doesn't help us, doesn't help anyone around us, definitely doesn't move the world forward. So these are all things that we can just pop out of that, even if it's for microseconds, but just enough to ask a different question, or, to your point, make a different decision. And then next thing you know, you're on a different path and you're like, oh, there it is.
What a beautiful invitation to recalibrate, maybe reorient in a different way, to not seeing ourselves as being owned or commanded by our minds or our fears or our catastrophizing, but rather to just begin to train the mind to see the world differently, to see our experiences differently. Also, the imagine if, I mean, that could be used with like any scary choice, possibility, vulnerability,
Mhm.
boundary. Like you just start to see like what is possible if I really stepped into this thing. And you can't ask other people that who have limited mindsets. You can ask people who have expansive mindsets, people who are like,
Yeah.
oh my God, everything's possible. You could change your life. It'll be, imagine the love you can create, the life you can create. So Marc, these are all such beautiful invitations. And I appreciate you turning your mess into your message and, you know, becoming the teacher that you needed is for us to invite this. So curious for the people listening, where can they find more of you and where can they, I'm guessing they can find your book anywhere books are sold, but
Yeah.
any details people need. I know your podcast is called Behind the Human, and I know you can get that anywhere that podcasts are.
Yeah, well, so I mean, I kept things easy. The website link, everything forwards to behindthehuman.com. So pod's there, the book's there, the work that I'm doing with teams is also there. I'm a message away. Like I would love to just share the questions that work for you. I'm not saying that, you know, the ones that you're pulling from my book, just your reflective questions, because as you probably have gathered, I'm somewhat of a collector of questions, of thousands of them, and I love to curate these questions with you know the proper moments to make real impact. So please share them, and I love to share that with the community.
You also work with teams. You also work with leaders. You also work with people one-on-one. So where
Yeah.
is that the possibility of people being able to get more connection or direction from you?
Yeah, that's all at there's a for teams tab at the behindthehuman.com website. And all I'm doing there is really bringing in mental fitness into the workplace and slowing people down and priming people's minds to then ask the bigger questions. You know, when it's business related, like where are we playing it safe? Right? And just asking questions like that. But it's hard to answer a question like that when your mind is loaded up. So, first, we take some time just like releasing, checking in, and coming out of the mind into the body so we can actually go a little bit deeper.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, sir, for being here today. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If this episode resonated with you, one of the best ways to support the show is to go subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any more. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to it, or share the episode with your community on Instagram or whatever social place you like to hang out. This helps get it into more people's ears, and I'm so grateful for your support always. Thanks again for tuning in. Much love.